Hey everyone, today we're diving into the twisted world of American McGeesalice and discussing why the gameplay in the original game is so different from its sequel, Alice Madness Returns. Specifically, we'll be talking about the bias towards the prequel's more strategic and challenging gameplay, which makes it far more fun and replayable. So, let's jump straight in and explore what sets these two games apart. American McGeesalice, released in 2000, was a groundbreaking action-adventure game that took the classic Alice in Wonderland story and gave it a dark and twisted spin. The game's unique art style, story, and gameplay quickly earned it a really huge and dedicated fanbase. Fast forward 11 years and we have the release of Alice Madness Returns. And while it retained the eerie atmosphere and stunning visuals, the gameplay underwent some significant changes. Many fans argue that Alice Madness Returns, which I'll just be calling Alice 2 from now on, has less challenging and repetitive gameplay compared to its predecessor, which required far more strategy and made better use of its large arsenal of weapons. I'll start by diving into the key differences between these two games, examining how these changes impact the overall gameplay experience. So I'll get started by looking at the weapon variety in each game. One of the most painful differences between these two games is the variety of weapons and strategic use of weapons available. In Alice 1, players have access to a whole bunch of weapons, 10 to be specific, each with its own unique abilities and advantages. This gigantic range of weaponry encourages experimentation and strategy, which makes the gameplay feel more fun and rewarding. Some memorable weapons from the first game include the Vorpal Blade, and I know this weapon is present in both games, but in this game melee is pretty much useless, so you'll come back to this weapon more and more because it has a throwing function which does not use up your meta essence or magic in this game.
The Jack Bomb, a jack-in-the-box that acts as a timed explosive, which also acts as a flamethrower if you use its secondary function, but can also kill you if you step into the fire, so strategic use is needed. And of course the Eye Staff, a powerful magical staff that shoots a deadly energy beam. The longer you shoot it, the more energy it drains of course, but upon releasing, it fires off an explosive which can harm you as well. As a secondary function, it just nukes the sky and fires down explosives everywhere, which can also kill you. Seeing how there are so damn many enemies in the game, most of which can kill you in like 2 to 3 hits, these weapons offer you different tactical advantages at different times. You'll end up needing almost all of these weapons at some point or another. Alice 1 also has a resource management system common in most games at the time, where you've got to collect meta essence or mana, that blue bar on the right there, to use your weapons more effectively. This mechanic encourages you to be strategic in the use of your weapons, as if you don't have enough meta essence for the next enemy, you're going to be stuck with just your blade. Now on the other hand, Alice Madness Returns, or as I said Alice 2, offers you a really small selection of weapons. I think it's only 4, I don't remember. And this becomes really repetitive over time. For example, the Hobby Horse is so goddamn overpowered that you'd be stuck using this weapon the entire game unless you're literally forced to use another weapon. As such, you're far less likely to switch between weapons and develop actual strategies, which can make the gameplay feel way less engaging. For instance, the sequel's core arsenal consists of the Vorpal Blade, which is the most basic hack and slash weapon you can think of, the Pepper Grinder, a ranged weapon similar to a machine gun which never runs out of ammo mind you, the Hobby Horse, which is a slow and powerful melee weapon, and the Teapot Cannon, which is a projectile weapon with splash damage. While these weapons offer some variety, they don't quite reach the same level of creativity and strategic depth found in the first game.
See, in the first game, not having meta essence is essentially suicide because you're stuck with the only 2 weapons in the game that does not need meta essence, which is the Vorpal Blade and the Croquet Mallet, both of which are melee weapons. Use a melee weapon in any situation in the game and you're essentially screwed. Unless you can somehow cheese the enemies, that is. Now this change streamlines the gameplay experience and it also completely removes the element of strategy, making the game essentially not at all challenging or engaging. you can essentially steamroll entire levels by just using one weapon and spamming the hell out of it until the enemy dies. That's how easy this game is. Another big difference between the two games is their level design. Alice 1 features a far more interconnected and intricate world, where each level offers a distinct visual and gameplay experience. The game's non-linear design and varied environments encourage exploration and reward players for their curiosity. For example, you can actually find weapon upgrades and the strongest weapon in the entire game, the blunderbuss, which one-shots enemies at the expense of your entire meta essence bar. For example, you can actually find weapon upgrades and the strongest weapon in the entire game, the blunderbuss, which one-shots basic enemies at the expense of your entire meta essence bar. While in Alice 2, the only thing you can find are memories and lore-based stuff.
The levels in Alice 1 are really designed to challenge you. See, players need to often solve puzzles, navigate complex platforming sections, all the while fighting these really strong enemies. One missed jump, one wrong parkour, and you're completely dead. You've got to restart from the last checkpoint. Meanwhile in Alice 2, jumping off the goddamn sky means you just teleport back onto ground. Moreover, this is a personal preference, but the first game really incorporates some Metroidvania elements, with certain areas being inaccessible until players acquire specific weapons or abilities. This design choice encourages exploration and backtracking, adding depth to the gameplay experience and incentivizing players to revisit previous areas to uncover hidden secrets. In contrast, Alice 2 opts for a more linear and straightforward level design. The environments, although visually impressive, I mean, look at this, or this, feels more like a series of set pieces rather than an immersive interconnected world. Players progress from one area to another in a predetermined sequence, with little to no opportunity for exploration or deviation from the main path. Now, of course, you can explore and find memories or lore pieces here and there, but there's nothing to really enhance your gameplay in the long run. Now, don't get me wrong, the sequel does feature some platforming and puzzle-solving sections, but they often feel way less challenging and less integral in the overall gameplay experience compared to the original game. This shift in focus towards more linear progression and simplified gameplay can make Alice 2 feel way less challenging and more repetitive. This shift in focus towards more linear progression and simplified gameplay can make Alice 2 feel way less challenging and more repetitive, especially when all the enemies look basically the same. Speaking of enemies, when it comes to enemy encounters, Alice 1 boasts a wide array of foes, each with unique strengths and weaknesses. And it's this diverse cast of enemies that requires you to adapt to their strategies and make the best use of your weapons, making each battle feel fresh and challenging. The enemies in Alice 1 are inspired by the characters and creatures from Lewis Carroll's original Alice stories, but they've been reimagined for a darker and more sinister light. For example, players will face off against the Boojum, a flying ghostly creature that shoots off energy projectiles and requires ranged attacks to defeat, and the Army Ant, a heavily armored enemy that can only be damaged by attacking its vulnerable abdomen. Each enemy type in the first game has its distinct attack patterns and weaknesses, forcing you to think on your feet and adapt your strategies accordingly. The Phantom Phantasm, for instance, is immune to physical attacks and can only be damaged by magical weapons like the Ice Staff, while the Red Queen's Card Guards can block frontal attacks, which force you to go around them in order to attack. Also, the first game features way more challenging and memorable boss battles that actually test your skills and resourcefulness. These encounters actually demand a combination of strategy, timing, and weapon mastery, providing an actual satisfying and engaging challenge for you to overcome. In contrast, in Alice 2, enemy variety is really limited, and many, if not all, encounters feel like a basic hack and slash experience. While the game does introduce some new enemy types such as the Ruin, a molten lava-like creature that's vulnerable to the Pepper Grinder's rapid fire, and the Colossal Ruin, a larger version of that Ruin that spawns smaller enemies and requires well-timed dodges to avoid its powerful attacks, the overall density of enemies completely pales in comparison to the first game. Many of the encounters in the sequel can be overcome using similar tactics and relying on a single weapon, such as the pepper grinder or the hobby horse. The insidious ruin, for example, although described as one of the strongest enemies in the sequel, can really be easily defeated with a combination of ranged attacks and well-timed dodges, without the need to even change weapons or adapt strategies at all. Furthermore, the boss battles in Madness Returns are fewer and far less memorable than that of those in the first game. In fact, I can only remember one boss in the entire game, being the Dollmaker. While the sequel does feature some challenging encounters like that Dollmaker, they often feel way less impactful and less intricately designed than the boss fights in Alice 1. Which leads to, I think, the most important point of the entire video, the difficulty balance. A key aspect of any game's appeal is its difficulty balance, and it's here where the two Alice games diverge significantly. In Alice 1, the difficulty curve is carefully balanced, with players facing increasingly complex challenges and stronger enemies as they progress through the game.
This gradual increase in difficulty keeps the gameplay engaging and provides a constant sense of achievement as players overcome each new obstacle. Additionally, the first game offers different difficulty settings, allowing players to customize their experience based on their skill level and preference. This feature caters to a wide range of players, from those who enjoy a casual stroll through Wonderland to those who crave a more intense and challenging journey. Now, Alice 2 on the other hand has a much less balanced difficulty curve. While the sequel does offer multiple difficulty settings, the overall challenge is less consistent, with some sections feeling too easy and others feeling unfairly difficult. This inconsistency can lead to a far less satisfying gameplay experience, as players may breeze through certain parts of the game only to hit a huge difficulty spike that feels out of place. The sequel's streamlined gameplay and simplified mechanics, as discussed earlier, also contributes to its easier difficulty. The limited weapon variety, more straightforward level design, and reduced enemy diversity all make Madness Returns a less challenging game compared to its predecessor. This shift towards a more accessible and less challenging gameplay experience can make the sequel feel way less engaging, particularly for players who really enjoyed the strategic depth and challenge of the original game. The gameplay differences between Alice 1 and 2 has a significant impact on their fun factor and replayability. The original game, with its rich weapon variety, intricate level design, diverse enemy encounters, and well-balanced difficulty curve, offers a challenging and engaging experience that keeps players coming back for more. The more strategic gameplay and resource management in Alice 1 encourages experimentation and adaptation, providing a sense of accomplishment as players overcome the game's many challenges. Moreover, the game's non-linear design and hidden secrets promote exploration, making each playthrough really fun. Alice 2, while visually impressive and retaining the eerie atmosphere of the first game, simplifies far too many of the gameplay elements that made its predecessor stand out. The streamlined weapon system, linear level design, and less diverse enemy encounters led to a way more repetitive experience that lacks the same level of depth or challenge. While some players may prefer the more accessible gameplay of Alice 2, fans of the original game often argue that the sequel's simplification takes away from the overall experience, making it ultimately less engaging and less replayable. Ultimately, personal preferences play a significant role in determining which game's gameplay is more enjoyable. However, it's undeniable that the strategic depth and challenge of Alice 1 sets it apart from other games, especially Alice 2. And that's a wrap. Thanks for joining me as we explored the gameplay differences between American McGee's Alice and Alice Madness Returns. Do you agree with the bias towards the original game? Which game do you prefer and why? Assuming you've played it, of course. Let me know in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more in-depth video essays like this one. Do you agree with the bias towards the first game? Which game do you prefer and why, assuming you've played it, of course? Let me know in the comments below. And as always, don't forget to like and subscribe and tune in next week for more. Bye bye.